Hello and welcome to episode 39 of Just Keep Writing.
A podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
And I'm Will.
How's it going, guys?
Going good. Not going to lie.
Feel great. 2 beers in.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is a little behind the scenes, but we're here to introduce an interview that we had this week with Mr. Maurice Broaddus. But before we get to that, we're going to do our normal things. But it's been fun, man. We've been having a good time chatting with Maurice, and we'll kind of talk about what we've been up to since last we recorded, and then we'll get into that. So what do we want to do first? Housekeeping stuff?
Housekeeping.
All right. So we're not going anywhere, right? That's the one thing. We're not going to any conferences, that's for sure.
Pandemic 2020.
Right. But the other something that is coming up is a WXR meetup social thing.
Hey, we're going to Surrey.
Yeah, but that's what I'm getting to. We're kind of going to Surrey and WXR at the same time, right? So the way it's working this year, obviously, is we kind of talked about this last time. WXR Writing Excuses Retreat is teaming up with Surrey. Essentially, it's all going to be a virtual convention. So for WXR alumni and folks that were signed up for this year's cruise, there's going to be an event on the 11th of July, which is going to be really cool. I'm actually helping to plan that, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, honestly. We don't have a lot of details yet, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I haven't gotten anything other than what Marshall has said myself, so I look forward to it.
Well, yeah, and Will be there because he told me he would.
Oh, okay. I didn't know I was going, but I'm going.
You're going, dude. You're going. Trust me. Okay. I already told Mary Robinette when we had a meeting a couple days ago. I said, so people like Will who didn't sign up and I was actually talking about a friend, like a friend of mine who wanted to sign up, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute, you know my friend. It's Will. And she's all, oh yeah, well, he can come. So you're good.
Oh, amazing. That's awesome. No, I'm excited.
You're an alumni, I think, in their eyes, even though you have never been on a cruise.
They know me. It's because of Futurescape.
And we got to hang out with Mary Robinette in Utah in February, too. So that was fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
Exciting.
You know, February seems like literally a year ago because we haven't been anywhere else. Because we would have been like 2 more weeks away from Comic-Con.
Yeah, we would have been to MoCon.
Yep.
We would have been seriously prepping for San Diego right now. Like, I would be in full-on Comic-Con mode right now if it was happening. And it's
we'd be planning our writing retreat in September too, and what we're gonna do.
Yep. So a lot of things have moved around, but anyway, here we are. So I'm gonna throw it over to Will and Nick. You guys have been doing a really good job of setting up interviews with writers. Let's talk a little bit about our social media and what we've been doing, and encouraging our listeners, who are loyal listeners, to go out and tell their friends, their writing buddies, and communities to tune in, because we got some fun stuff coming up. So what do we got for them?
Well, Instagram, Just Keep Writing Podcast. We're doing a book of the day. So every day I'll be posting a book that one of us have read or all of us have read. For the most of the end of June, we did a lot of LGBTQ authors. It's always going to be a super inclusive, diverse group of books that one of us have read. Sometimes it'll be all of us who've read it because we overlap. And then to get the word out, reviews, iTunes reviews, you know, it really helps. 5 stars, of course, because you love us.
Oh, yeah.
And just really sharing it as much as possible. Nick, what do you have? What did I miss?
Scheduled interviews coming up. We got Maurice Broaddus on this episode that you guys are going to listen to. We're actually going to be discussing with Mary Robinette and her upcoming book that's coming out.
Relentless Moon.
July 21st. See? And that's through Tor. So we've got an interview coming up with her just right about the week before the release of the book. We'll put that out there. So if you guys haven't already, and if it's available for pre-order, you can find that in our show notes. But go ahead and pre-order that because, you know, you love Mary Robinette as much as we do. But yeah, we also got Suyi Davies that's going to be coming up in August. And Suyi's actually one of our WXR alumni, one of our favorite authors. David Mogo, God Hunter is his most recent book, and he just had a 3-book deal. And remind me of the publisher on that one, Will. Do you know who the publisher is?
I'm pretty sure it's Orbit.
Yeah, so Suyi's doing great things. Yeah, Suyi's doing great things. And to top it all off, Suyi's in an MFA program at the University of Arizona and is also teaching English there at the same time. So he's pretty busy. So, Suyi, shout out and thank you for, letting us schedule something with you and getting us fit into your busy schedule.
And we do have plans for others, of course. Do we have any others to announce? Sorry, I cut you off, I think.
It's okay. Fran Wild in September.
Awesome.
With her. And then we have a couple other people that we just all 3 of us have to talk about real quick. We have a lot of people coming on.
No, and that's exciting. And if you like our interviews, please let us know. Jump in the Discord. Let us know what you get out of them, what you want us to ask authors that we've mentioned ahead of time that we're going to be talking to. If you have questions, throw them in the Discord. And definitely keep chatting with us because we're having a lot of fun and we want to keep growing. So thank you ahead of time for liking us and telling your friends and 5-star ratings and all that, right?
Yeah,
So, guys, if there's nothing else, should we talk about what we talked about with Maurice real quick? Because that was fun.
Yeah, sure.
So, Maurice Broaddus, this is not his first time on the show. We brought him on. He was on episode 3, so you can definitely check that out. And I don't think we had much overlap in stories. Maurice is full of stories. So, he's a blast to hang out with. And we have a lot of updates on his work. And what else did we talk about? We were talking about The Usual Suspects. And that's his middle grade novel. We talked about that for quite a bit. So there might be some minor spoilers, and I'm going to tell you that ahead of time. So if you haven't read that book, there's not a whole lot of spoilers, but, just a little bit here and there.
We don't solve the mystery for y'all, okay? We don't tell you exactly what happens. But I would encourage you to go read it. It's so fun, and it's such a good middle grade book. And if you want to read something or listen to it on audio that really captures that age group's voice, because it both feels timeless but yet really fresh, you have to read and listen.
Maurice is a very talented writer, and as we discussed with them in the episode, he's written across, I feel like, every genre. And the most recent genre is just middle grade. And
he shares a lot of his, personal stories, how he got going. Some of the hurdles that he's come up against. And yeah, man, it's a really fun interview. Definitely don't tune that part out because we're going to stop talking here in a second.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to say before we get into the interview, boys?
I think that's it for me. Nick?
I got nothing right now. No, we have a couple books that we can do giveaways with again. Cool. Barbara Lund's got a book that we can give away, and then we still have Vultures from Luke.
Totally. So let's do an announcement about that on next episode.
Now, do we want to make it like a writing contest geared thing, or like, hey, we're gonna pull someone who
social media? We'll make it a social media driven campaign.
That's better. Less reading.
Yeah.
Did you see how fast he jumped at the camera on that?
Yeah, no, I like it. I like his internet.
Yeah. So we're going to do a social media campaign where when you follow us on Instagram and you tag 4 people and they follow us, then you're in the contest to win it with your friends. So all of you will be entered. We'll go over it as well.
Yeah. So we'll do the official rules next episode. So be thinking about this, people.
I also have a second signed copy of Pimp My Airship too.
Ooh, that's right. All right.
We end up with 4 of those.
Okay.
That's right. We did end up with double. The only one I don't have signed.
I need to get that one. I don't have that one.
Oh,
yet.
Dude.
It's the Voices of Martyrs, everyone.
Yeah,
I only got that because of the cover. I fell in love with the cover. Yeah. And that's what really sold me. Obviously, I love Maurice, right? But the cover was the one thing where I was like, I have to have it on my shelf. Like, yep, I'm that person.
And also next week, I think, or next episode, we'll kind of do a recap on our writing and where we're at. Because I think it'll be time.
Yeah,
it will. Because, Marshall, I have a flash fiction to write.
And I'll be giving mixed feedback.
Do you have time tomorrow?
What tomorrow I'm going to write everything up.
Okay. I still owe you an ending, but life.
Oh, I know. You owe me a lot more after this.
I owe you a complete book after this, and maybe a couple beers.
I love it. All right, gents. So let's move over to the interview, and we'll see you guys all next time. So, and joining us this week is Maurice Broaddus, who we've had you on the show before. And so welcome back, my friend. How you been?
Been good. Surviving, doing my thing.
The world's a bit crazy right now, huh?
Yeah, but I have achieved a new quiet space in all of the chaos that we are really digging a whole lot. Well, okay, I shouldn't say we, but I am digging a whole lot. So basically, all right, so we've moved. So Nick, you haven't even seen our new place, but you would have if right, and you would have all of you would have seen it if we'd been able to do MoCon.
And Will was supposed to go too. We were all supposed to meet up.
We all could have been, we would have been together in this space. And then you could have seen it for yourself. But so I have a front porch, right? And I've dubbed the front porch my coffee shop. And so I basically call my neighbors, my regulars, they'll pass by and, we're starting to get familiar and then starting to recognize each other on a regular basis. And then I noticed in the last 2 weeks, because my mother now lives with us also. And and so my porch has been violated. So only half of the porch is the coffee shop. The other half of the porch is my mother's veranda.
Okay.
And never the two shall meet. And so and over the last couple of weeks, so I posted about this once on Twitter about how I'm in my coffee shop. Well, so what's happened is different artists in the community has started to just drop by the coffee shop. And
no way.
Oh man, it is dope as hell. I ain't gonna lie. And so, like today, I had a couple artists come by, a couple, like high level poets who like, hey, can we just stop by and hang? And I'm like, absolutely, you can. And that's the way it's been almost solid for like the last couple of weeks. It's like I'll get my work done, or it'll be interrupted by artists dropping in and just hanging for a while. So. It's like my little oasis within the chaos. This is a long introduction, by the way. Hello, everybody. Glad to be back.
No.
How's that?
Like I said, man, we're just glad to have you back on the show. And your coffee shop sounds phenomenal. We wish we could be there.
Man, that's all I can say. Man.
Sooner rather than later, hopefully, when the world rights itself, right. we'll get together again, right?
I look forward to
it. All right, Will, do you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I'll totally jump in. So, Maurice, I wanted you to describe your writing career in 3 words.
Me describe my writing career in 3 words.
Yep.
Angry, perseverance, miraculous.
Okay.
Can we unpack those descriptions?
Yes. So let's see. What did I say? Angry.
Yeah.
Perseverance.
Well, we'll start with angry. So angry is how. So I realize I've been in the game. This is my 21st year in the game, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been in it a minute. But the first 10 years of my career, up until the Night Supreme Court series sold, I was basically known as a horror writer. Mm-hmm. And it took me looking back on all that to realize, a lot of my horror career was just me venting my anger in a lot of ways. I mean, my stories were. They were horror stories, but they were horror stories built from my anger as I was trying to parse through what it means to be a Black man in America. And and a lot of rage accompanied that journey. So I describe a lot of my horror career as me just being angry and figuring out what to do with that anger.
Okay. And perseverance.
So so the next realization I had was, a lot of the folks I came up with and started off with, I think the only thing that separated me from them, or from a lot of them, is the fact that I just stuck it out. It's not like I'm this hugely talented writer. It's like I just kind of stuck around and kept doing it.
Stayed in the game kind of thing.
No, that's it exactly though. Because I mean, if I've been in it for 20 years, at some point you hope, if you're continuing to improve with each story you write, at some point you hope you start to figure it out. Right. And so when I talk about perseverance, I'm talking about, yes, I stuck to my writing. I stuck to pursuing publishing. I stuck through all the madness that is the publishing world. And just that sheer perseverance, after a while, I started to get some traction, started to get some sales under me on a more regular basis, started to gain some confidence, started to figure out what the market was like, really, to be honest, because that's also part of it, just figuring out, where the market is and that sort of thing, and where the best places are to I create this thing, but now where's the best home for it? Rather than just start doing the scattershot, I'll just go down my usual list. It's like, you know what? I now know the list a lot better, and I know these markets a lot better. So let me actually just do some more specialized, here, you know what market? I know that this would be a great fit for you. So let me get this story to you. And then that cuts down that whole, my rejection cycle, cut down a whole lot more after I started, figuring things out like that. So.
And miraculous.
Yeah, I don't even know what my life is like these days. I'm looking at, because, it wasn't even that long ago. Look, you laugh. Look here. You laugh. But it wasn't that long ago. To be straight, it wasn't that long ago where I was like having conversations with my buddies talking about, man, if I only could get an editor to make direct eye contact with me, Yeah. It wasn't that long ago. Those memories are still quite fresh. And so the fact that I'm working on some of the projects I'm working on, I'm just like, or having some of the conversations about my career, I'm like, seriously? Are you sure you have the right Maurice Broaddus as you guys are talking about? So I can't make heads or tail of it. I'm just along for the ride at this point.
I guess this is a perfect segue too, because I feel like Western culture fetishizes young hit authors who do really well, but then they fizzle out. Like, you've had a really long and interesting career. So can you talk about that? Like, perseverance, because I feel like now I've read almost all of your work. I'll be honest. I was telling Nick.
Hang on for a second. You guys do realize Will is not my favorite person, right?
No, we knew that would happen, which is why he's a permanent member of the show now.
I just needed y'all to acknowledge the fact that Will is not my favorite person. All right, go ahead, Will.
Yeah. Sorry. He's an amazing person. That's why we keep him around.
I appreciate it. But no, I've read your work a lot because I've really loved horror. That's what really got me interested in reading was horror. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because as I grew up, I started finding a lot of people who are marginalized in any aspect of society. For me, it was being gay. Mm-hmm. Somehow I related so much to horror first, and that was like my gateway into what I wanted to read, where it was fantasy and science fiction. So it extrapolated. But back to the thing, if you've been doing this for 21 years, and I feel like now people are just realizing, I hear your name mentioned so much. So what would you say to writers who are in their 30s or 40s who are still trying to get into it? What would your words of wisdom really be?
Yeah, because some of us are in our 40s, Maurice, and we're doing the thing, but we're no Maurice yet,
Right. Well, look here, young and hip is not; those aren't words that belong in the same sentence as Maurice Broaddus anymore. Let me assure you. One of the things I tell them is hey, my first novel published was my fifth novel written. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, my first novel came out when I was 40. Okay. So a lot of the stuff that I've seen in my career has really been in the last 10 years. And the first 10 years of my career is a lot of just figuring it out. And you know what? And speaking of fetishizing, I think another thing that gets fetishizing is the whole idea of we get afraid to fail at stuff. And let me tell you, I am not, as most of my career will attest to, I fail at a lot of things. I would try something in a heartbeat just to see if I can do it. And if I can't, it's well, at least I try. Look, The Usual Suspects is a perfect example of that. I had no business writing a middle grade novel. But I was hey, why not? I mean, the stuff I've ended up doing, and this is the kind of thing that frustrates my agent, to be honest with you, because she knows full well, when she brings me a project, she'll bring me the project and then has to like, all right, now that I've sold you on the project, I'm going to remove you from the conversation because the whole money part of it, you suck at that negotiation because you'll do this project just for the sheer challenge of doing the project. There's, heck, when I was working on that video game Watch Dogs 2, man, I'd have done that project for a good ham sandwich. Right? I'd never done anything like that before. And I was just like, man, this has got to be, the experience of this alone is going to be incredible. Right. So yeah, I would have been in it for that. And that's why I surround myself with people who have business sense, which by the way, is a bit of advice, is surround yourself with good people because you kind of need it.
For sure. Do you,
did I answer your question? You have to let me know if I
did. No, you did. I don't know. Like I said, we've had these conversations before a little bit, Maurice, and I love hearing you say that. It gives us a little bit of hope's not the right word, but hope is the right word. It's like, we're still, Will and I are about the same age. We're a little older than Nick, but we're all doing this thing, and the business is crazy and everything's changing, but we just want to know that we can still do it eventually, maybe.
Heck, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, the biggest hope statement is the fact that, hey, you know what? I did it. Like,
right?
The door is open for everybody.
I am more than happy to follow your career path. Just saying.
This is where I want to actually segue into like your career. You began writing horror, and you did this steampunk fantasy, and you've written some science fiction, and then you wrote this really amazing middle grade novel. Was that a really hard jump to do, or did it come more natural, and did it surprise you?
Yes. I suppose you want more than that.
Yes, please.
If possible.
Unpack that for a minute.
Okay. I mean, I do know you have a source of inspiration.
Yeah.
That is a loving family member.
And frankly, you know what? Here's the thing. Y'all are lucky right now that they are all playing video games at the moment because we're recording this podcast during their designated Siege time. So they're off playing Siege at the moment, either Siege or 2K. I can never keep track of which game they're playing. Otherwise, at some point during this interview, a shirtless teenager would come bounding in here for no apparent reason and just hung out. Knowing full well I'm recording, but they're like, is it anyone important? They don't look important. I'm just hanging out. I'm like, okay. So I've spared you all from that.
All good.
And so with Usual Suspects, I had done, I had sort of like a watershed moment in my life. And so I'd done a career pivot, and now I find myself in a spot where I can shadow these two lovely boys of mine through school. And so I was shadowing them as a substitute teacher. And during when they were in public school, I became a sub in their school, so I could keep an eye on them and just sort of be support for them, and frankly to back up the teachers because I know my boys can get up to semantics. I mean, I just know this, and so I was doing that, and then one of the classes was called the special ed room. And that's where they had a lot of their quote unquote troubled students or their more high maintenance, or I don't know what language they were using for these students. But I absolutely love these students. I mean, it was mostly Black students, high energy, wicked smart. Yet they were consigned to this. They were consigned to this special ed room, and I could never figure out why they were in the special ed room. So I drew a lot of my inspiration from my experiences then, and then who knew I was actually going to get into an actual teaching career, which is what happened next. Again, tied to the antics of my children. I love them. They can do some things. They can come up with some things, but that became the theme of Usual Suspects because Lord knows my children are often the usual suspects. My youngest especially. But the fact of the matter is you have these young Black males who are highly intelligent, high energy, and bored a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And the worst thing is to have a bored middle schooler, because a bored middle schooler, heck, a bored student. Period. Look here, when my kids complain about being bored, I will like, hey, you're bored. Go play a video game. Do you know why? Video games. I know where you are. Lord knows I can hear you and your friends. And I know what you're up to. If you're bored and you don't have that outlet, they will find ways to amuse themselves. Boredom is never actually boredom's never a thing. You ain't gonna die from boredom. It's that you'll die from amusing yourself from boredom. And so that's why I'm just like, oh man. So the stuff my kids would do, or the stuff these kids would do to amuse themselves. Well, I also realize, I think in my heart, I'm also just an eternal 12-year-old, because their antics always amused me. I just don't get mad. I just like, oh. In fact, I think the only time I actually do get mad is when they don't try. I'm like, look.
Right.
Look, you didn't even,
you know they can do it.
Right. You could do better. You didn't even take the extra 2 minutes it would take to cover your tracks a little bit. Come on now. I expect better out of y'all.
Well, I taught middle school for a year, and I've been at the high school over a decade now. And as soon as a kid is bored, that's when they act out. That's when they, and there's all the designations and different classes and stuff like that, man. But reading this book, and knowing you, like there's a question I'm going to ask. I think Will's going to get there at some point, but I see you in a certain character.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Will.
So I guess, first of all, can you pitch The Usual Suspects to everyone who's listening? Like, what is The Usual Suspects about?
So The Usual Suspects, the short pitch is when we have two rambunctious preteens, Thelonious and Nehemiah, and well-known, we'll just say pranksters within the school. And whenever something goes wrong in the school, they just round up the usual suspects, which is Thelonious, Nehemiah, and their cast of friends. And one of the main thrusts I had for writing it was I wanted to, at the time, my boys were that age, and I wanted to see if I could write something that would amuse them. So I was basically trying to write like Walter Mosley for the middle school set, because crime fiction is one of the things. Getting around to actually answering your question at some point. Crime fiction is one of the things I love. I love crime fiction. It's one of the things I read during my downtimes. Well, not that I have much these days, but that was my go-to reading. And when you read the Knights of Breton Court, I mean, the Knights of Breton Court is basically a trilogy love letter to George Pelecanos. Because he's one of my favorite crime writers. And so, Walter Mosley is one of my favorite crime writers. So, writing Walter Mosley for kids was just like, hey, I wonder if this would fly. And but I wrote the book back in 2012, and didn't think twice about it. And then when I got with my agent and I told her about it, she was like, wait, you wrote what? Oh yeah, we're going with this. We're going with this. It's like, okay.
That's amazing. So all the characters I really felt like had these really distinct personalities. I feel like what The Usual Suspects did is it was really timeless in a lot of ways, but also really fresh. It's just like a breath of fresh air, but I feel like you identify with that. The way it was written, like you really got into the mind of the characters, of being that age. So what was that like for you? Was it something like that came natural to you just because your boys were so young? Or did you have to kind of work in building that type of characters?
Let's see. Well, it helped that the boys were about that age at the time, because they have they become my ground zero for research. Between them and then now working at a middle school. Because I was by the time I was doing the revisions and all that, I'm now firmly working at the middle school. So I am surrounded by nonstop examples of this world. But yeah, man. So for example, because I haven't written this actual sequel to Usual Suspects yet, although technically it is actually written. And hopefully my publishers don't actually hear that, because I'm going to pretend that I'm a genius when it comes to writing it. Like, oh, you want another book? Oh, let me agonize over. No, so because in my son's 8th grade year, my youngest son's 8th grade year, and I'm not going to go into the story. I'm not going to go into the story. I'll tell you that right now. But I will say this: in the middle of the police investigation, as we're sitting across from the detectives questioning us, my son literally leans over to me and goes, "Hey, I bet I gave you an idea for the sequel."
That's hilarious.
And I'm like,
that's awesome.
Really, we're going to do this now? Because I didn't need your help. Didn't need your help. But oh yeah, this is going to be the sequel. Oh, this is so going to be the sequel. Once we get out of all this, this is so going to be the sequel for if I write book 2. This will so be the sequel.
That's awesome.
When you read The Usual Suspects, know that Nehemiah, the character of Nehemiah, he is influenced a lot by my youngest son, the shirtless one who just popped in here.
Okay.
And then my older son, a lot of people would automatically default to Thelonious, and there is some threads of Thelonious in I take from my oldest son, but my oldest son actually served the inspiration for their rival Marcel, I should say.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. So my oldest son was like, "Wait, you made me the black girl?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Hey, cool." And I'm like, "All right."
So I want to talk about Thelonious and Nehemiah's relationship, because I really felt like this is something in books, in middle grade books, that you don't see enough. Like, they have a really special bond, like they show love, There was this one sentence that I wrote down that Thelonious said, like, we don't have to talk, but we know what is being said. It was something to that effect. Like, they don't need to talk, and they know that everything's said. And I was like, that reminds me so much of the way me and one of my best friends that I grew up with, it also reminds me of my nephews, brothers, and interacting. You could have so much fun and not say anything. So did you base that on your sons, or was it more of like relationships that you've had?
A bit of both. So so my son's age difference, because they're 14 months apart, it's also the same age difference as me and my brother, because we're 14 months apart. And very similar personalities. My oldest son tends to take after me. My youngest son tends to take after my brother. I see this dynamic just keep playing out. And then even when I'm in school, I see kids who just every year, it's like you're this year's Thelonious and you're this year's Nehemiah. And just watching these sort of interactions just naturally just sort of continue to play out. But I think that line in particular, I was watching my boys with my nephews. Because my sister has 3 boys, but when they get with my boys, all 5 of them, we call them Voltron. Well, I call them Voltron. You get the 5 of them together, and they literally are just the same person. They get together, and they don't have to say anything. They can just sit and just be with each other, and it's a beautiful thing. When they start talking, it usually goes horribly awry. I did at one point. They were having a slumber party, and speaking of a writing lesson, so here, look, I'll do some applied writing advice on the spot.
Oh, perfect.
And so I was like, "Hey, I'm working on this middle grade book. You guys are having a slumber party. Is it all right if I leave my recorder in here to just capture some of you guys' conversation, so I can, hear the rhythms of how you speak, and so I can see if I can capture it and emulate it, that sort of thing?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, Uncle Maurice, blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "Yeah, just to be straight, anything you guys say on here, you won't get in trouble for." And they're like, "That's what we needed to hear." So like, okay. So in the first half hour, my sons used the opportunity to confess to a whole bunch of stuff, since they knew they couldn't be prosecuted.
I love it.
That was great. So then once we got past that, about an hour or so in, I'm just like, man, middle school boys talk about some dumb stuff. I mean, like literally, they went on a 45-minute philosophical discussion on the nature of their farts, and I'm like, "This,
oh my god,
this will not be in the book,
hilarious,
or any book as far as I'm concerned."
Right?
But it's like, middle school boys left to their devices. This is the deep sort of stuff that they will talk about. So yeah, but that's the sort of thing, But then capturing their joy of being with each other. Oh yeah, that's a whole thing. If I can capture their joy and their exuberance of just being boys, I figure I've done my job.
Yeah, I totally feel like you did in The Usual Suspects.
Yeah. It totally comes through. I mean, there are moments where Thelonious is, transitioning from one space to another, and then it's almost like he relaxes and he's more himself when he's around his buddy, and it's just really. It's subtle, but it's you did it so well, man.
Yeah,
it's really well done.
Thank you.
So, Marcel, I'm glad you touched upon her because I feel like she is actually the villain of the story. She is like the mastermind of everything.
And she's not. I love Marcel so much because Marcel, in a lot of ways, reminded me about how I was in school too. Which is because look, it's never as in my teaching experience, it's not the loud braying kid who I got to worry about because I know where they are. It's like, oh, someone's making noise. I know exactly where you are at all times. My eye is on you. It's the quiet, smart ones I worry about because I was a quiet, smart one. And the quiet, smart ones are like, hey, you know what? Because what do teachers do with the quiet, smart ones? They trust them with a bunch of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So like me in high school, me and my friends were trusted with a lot of stuff. Things like we would do the busy work of teachers, like recording the absentee records. Right? So I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're trusting high school students with reporting the attendance of their friends.
Yeah, I would never do that. Oh
This
my God.
This became a service I offered at some point. Do you want to be for a low fee, you were in class all the time.
You were there every day.
Every day. I'm just like, because I was quiet and smart and teachers didn't look twice at me. So I absolutely adore Marcel because she is straight up gangster. And she's not anyone's idea of gangster, but like she is one of the people who runs that school. And so I absolutely love her. So I never looked at her as the villain. I looked at her as like, you know what? I have complete agency. This school, I figured out the system and I'm just going to use the system to my advantage. And I'm not one bit mad at her.
Well, I think she's so likable because she's so capable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She's so.
Man, no, I do. I love that character so much. And yeah, I do. I modeled after my son. And because I gave a keynote speech at a library conference last year. And I ended up talking about my sons. And one of the things I said is like, look, I know what I've raised. My oldest son, he figures out your systems. He sits there, he studies them, he'll figure out your system so that he can bend that system to his advantage. That's Marcel. My youngest son does not give a crap about your system. He's going to stomp through life on his terms at all times. That's Nehemiah. That's my youngest son. And I don't want to change anything about how they operate. Because I think both of those ways are absolutely glorious. It's like, hey, you know what? If the system is broken, why stick to it? Because it's going to keep producing the same product over and over because that's what the system is designed to do. So you either bend the system to your advantage or you ignore the system entirely. I'm good either way. It's just that I also know that it's going to involve me in a lot of parent-teacher conferences later on. So there has been that.
Well, on that note, as far as, I mean, you've talked a lot about your son's influencing characters. I see there's one character in particular, I think, that I'm going to go ahead and say, because I know you, is a little bit like you. But did you, and as a teacher myself, I mean, it's pretty easy to put yourself in those positions, but as far as writing a character that is in charge of children, but is Mr. Blackman really just kind of a version of you in this world?
So yes, he is, and to the point where, like, after my current crop of students, when they started reading the book, they were like, "Wait a second, you literally dress like this dude." And I'm like,
I was just gonna say, there's a moment where you talk about his outfit, and I'm like, oh, that's Maurice.
Yeah,
that's Maurice.
But so here's the other thing, though. I am Mr. Blackman, but I'm also every sub in that book. So those subs those were my first days of teaching. So Mr. Blackman's where I am now. Those subs were where I was at the beginning.
Oh, subbing is brutal.
It is.
You did a good job
brutal.
With that.
And so, like, a lot of those stories, more true than not. I'll just put it to you that way.
Do you want me to ask the next question? Because I have more. I have like tons. I've read the book 5 times.
Oh, man.
Do we want to, because I'm looking at the clock, I think we got about 20 minutes or so. Do you want to do more questions on the usual suspects, or do you want to move on to anything else? Something else?
Okay. You know how it is, how I am with you guys. I'll say, all right, let's get together for maybe an hour, and then we get to run hours later, and then exactly. So let's go. Let's not worry about it.
Okay, all right.
So I want to talk about the screen room.
Oh,
this was really hard for me to read because it brings me back to my childhood, actually, because I was a lot like those kids. I was a lot like, I think, Thelonious and a mixture of Marcel, because I was quiet, but I was also, I would get into trouble a lot. I mean, Nick and Marshall know my background. Like, I go to juvie as a kid, and I stole cars, and it was adventurous. But, no one thought I would ever do something like that because I was so innocent seeming. But the screen room, I felt... Is that from something that you've experienced as a teacher?
So it was something I saw. So I saw it employed a couple times. Well, no, I tell you, I saw it employed a couple times when I was substituting in the special ed room, and that was a heartbreaking thing to watch. And I'm just like, wait, is this really how we're about ready to do this? Because there seems to be a whole lot of things we could do between where the kids were and putting them in this room. There's a whole lot of...
Early in my career, too, it was the same thing. I think they used to do similar things. They don't do it anymore as far as I know, but there was always a room, and I could not imagine being a kid in that room.
Right. And then I know for a fact they had my youngest in one of those rooms once. And I heard about it all after the fact. And then that's when I was like, now I'll be down at the school. Because no, that's no way to treat. No. And especially when it always seemed to be the black students who ended up in that room. Because they were the ones deemed hard to handle and all this kind of other stuff. Which is interesting because like where I'm working at now, because I've never taken a teaching class. I don't have a teaching degree, nothing. Right. But when I was again, walking my son through the situation that involved the police detectives, and I walked the conspirators, I walked the faculty, I walked my family. We all walked, I walked everybody through the situation. And then after all said and done, the principal calls me into her office, and I know what's coming. I'm like, all right, go ahead and fire me. I get it. And I was a sub at their school at the time too. And she goes, look, the way you walked everyone through the situation, the way you handled all the affected parties was a beautiful thing. And we can't teach that. And so, would you like to come on staff full time at our school? And I was just like, yeah, I'd love to. Wow. And so I work in the resource room now, and this is a different school. So this wasn't the school, but with the screen room or anything. But so they established this thing called the resource room. And so, but I mean, in terms of function, in a lot of ways, the functionality was the same. If a kid is, acting out or having a bad day, they come to see Mr. Broaddus.
Yep.
Well, I didn't have the terms for it at the time. Now I know the terms. It's like, I'm really good at de-escalation. So you could be having it don't matter what mood you are, you come sit with me for 10, 15 minutes, you're good. You're ready to go back to class. Yeah. I think the most punishing thing I do is make them listen to some Miles Davis. So, as stringent punishments go, it's like, no, now we're going to listen to some jazz music. Mr. Broaddus! Like, you know what? You need some Miles in your life. And so, and 10, 15 minutes, they're fine. They just needed someone to either listen to them, to care about them, to let them vent in a space. And that's all I let them do. I'm like, there's no magic that I'm doing. I'm just like, bro, go ahead, vent. I got you. Then we talk it through. They calm down, and then they're like, "Oh man, now I see what I did." And I think I might even have to owe a teacher an apology. Okay, they never actually come to that conclusion themselves. I kind of have to lead them. Let's
like. So, what are you gonna say when you see that teacher again?
Right, exactly. You know what you did. Come on. Like, all right, maybe that was a little much. Like, wasn't it? So, but that's all it is. It's just, I try to create a safe space for them to come, de-escalate. and a lot of times whatever is going on with them has nothing to do with what's going on in the classroom.
Right.
And so it's like, hey,
something at home or something.
Yeah, it's always something like that. So it's like, go ahead. What is it? Just talk to me, and we would talk, and then they de-escalate, go back to class. No scream room involved. But I mean, watching the scream room in action, I'm just like, this is no. Actually, you know what? That was when the whole prison analogy started to occur to me, because it was solitary confinement.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the equivalent of, all right, we got a prisoner, they're acting up, toss him in the hole. And the screaming was the hole. And I'm just like, yeah, this is no way to go through life. I'm sorry. Yeah.
This has to be a better way.
Right. There has to be a better way, because otherwise, what are we conditioning these students to do and be?
Right.
Yeah, I think the scene with Twan when he was and they put him in the screen room, I just felt it brought back a lot of when I was a kid. Actually. And I kept thinking, like, I think what really I love about this book so much is that all of the characters are fully realized, and you don't ever see the kids who are quote unquote the trouble kids being viewed as like whole people.
Right.
It's always quick to villainize them. And I feel like this book is so good for boys and girls who are automatically put in that category of being that bad seed. Yeah. Because to me, I just talked to Nick and Marshall about this week because I had a friend who's a teacher and it really bugged me. I just don't think children are born wrong or born bad seeds. I feel like they're trying to process these complex emotions and they need someone to listen to. So I felt like a lot of the scenes that you have with the adults started to let the kids handle their own problems. They were there for advice. They were there to listen, but there was also this responsibility for them to figure it out on their own. So was that challenging to write?
All right, here's how I answer that question. Mm-hmm. So I shadowed my sons through, well, actually, started in elementary school. And so it was the last year my youngest son was in the elementary school. And I know, so he's about to leave that school and then go off to middle school. And so I'm planning on going to middle school. But this whole time I'm at their school, I'm volunteering in the special ed room. Because like I said, I love those kids. And so on the last day of school, one of the kids in the special ed room comes up to me and is like, hey, are you going to go with us over to the middle school? And I'm like, no, I don't know where my son's going to go to this other school. So I'm going to go over to follow him at his school. Why do you ask? He goes, 'cause you get us and you like us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that told me everything I needed to know at the time, which was, there was no, like I said, there's no magic that I have when it comes to work with kids. It's just that I see them for who they are and I like them as they are. And the kids know when someone likes them. They know when someone likes them. And the person who was in the classroom, they knew full well. She was killing time. She was killing time and solved them all as problems. And my brother had a teacher like that when he was their age. And when he had, because we went to different schools. And so when he encountered this teacher, and she had a zero expectation. If you were a black male, she had zero expectation up for you. And he encountered her, and then we noticed that his school trajectory went straight into the toilet after that year and never recovered. So, and that was like 5th grade. He encountered her. He was never the same after that as a student. And so we were just like, well, maybe he just doesn't like school. Okay. But then my cousin comes up, encounters her. Exact same thing happens. And so now you're like, wait a second. Every black male in our family encounters you and then goes off the rails. Well, it turns out she had zero expectation for black male students. They were just thugs waiting to be arrested as far as she was concerned. And so she treated them like that in the classroom. And so you think, so it take, one bad teacher like that, like I said, that was 2 people in my own family that she derailed. Like, I can't even imagine how many countless students she encountered that she just derailed just because she didn't get and didn't like those students. Yeah. So, so my focus has always been, I see, and I try to be this way in all my relationships. I see the person in front of me. The person in front of me is who I am dealing with, and I want to see them in as total and full a way as possible, because that's the person I want to know, and that's the person I want to hang out with. And then I just carry that over to my students, because as it turns out, so middle school students sort of like people.
Yeah.
So I just
crazy,
treat them
right?
the same way. I know, it's crazy. So I treat them the same way, and go figure, they tend to respond to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like with all the things going on in the world recently with Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, I've written some stuff, and I've been talking to some former students, and it's interesting to see the students that reach back and kind of say, and just, you know, a direct message here and there, like, you know, thank you for actually, you know, seeing us, and thanks for listening to us and stuff like that. It's a huge thing, because I've had teachers who it's just like, it's just not where they're at, and not anything they could actually do. And I hear my students complain about, you know, some of my colleagues. None of them are going to listen to this anyway, but some of my colleagues, but it's the same thing. And it's like, they come to me to complain about them. And I'm just like, guys, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but we're cool when you're here, you know?
Right. Yeah. And that's what I try to do with my space. I'm just trying to create a safe space where, you know, you are free to be you here. Mm-hmm. But, you know, also remember, we're all on the clock also. So let's not get too nuts either.
Then there's that.
Was there any of the characters that you wrote that you were like, they're so fun to write, that surprised you?
Man, Nehemiah is always going to be my fun character to write. I ain't gonna lie, he was fun to write. The mom's character was probably one of my second favorite characters to write.
That confrontation in the front of the house was
okay.
awesome.
Now, so here's
so good.
Here's the thing. I'm debating, because my wife actually hates this, but like, let's just say that
just tell us,
because it was inspired. We'll just say it was inspired by a real event that happened in our front yard at some point. And, and so I'm sitting there watching this whole scene play out, and like, my wife, and I love my wife to death, but I mean, when she starts stomping around going, "Here's my neck, and like, everybody, like, we're all confused. Like, none of us knows what's going on. We all just want to look at each other like, "Here's my neck. What's that even mean?" And I'm like, and so they looked at me and like, "What's that mean?" I'm like, "I don't know, but I'm writing that down because this is gold. This is."
I laughed out loud when I read that line, and with the Thelonious, like, what does that even mean? That was so funny, man.
For the record, that's the only scene my wife has ever been the inspiration for, and the only thing about her I've ever written in any of my books ever.
Sure. Okay.
Wanted that on the record.
I've met your wife. She's amazing.
She is. Oh yeah. I'm not even gonna open up that. You're like, yes, she is. She is, and she is a character. And we're two people who you would look at us and go, how and why are you two together? But then you hear us interact, and you're like, oh yeah, we get it now. All right,
yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Nick, do you want to jump in? I feel like I'm like asking everything.
No, what I was going to say though, do you want to go off, because you had something about Apex? If you want to go to that, or did you guys want to talk about something else?
Yeah, I want to definitely talk about Apex, because it is being relaunched on 2021, and they're doing Kickstarter, I think, still this month, right?
It's going to be, I think it's mid-July is when we're looking at doing the Kickstarter.
So can you talk about it? Like, you know, like your involvement and, you know, why, I'm super excited it's being relaunched, but like, tell me like the process with it.
The process of it is I wasn't paying nearly careful enough attention to my emails when I was responding yes to Jason. And apparently one of those emails, he was saying, "I'm going to be the new editor over there." And so now I guess I've committed to that. Look, me and Jason go way, way back, right? So in a lot of ways, we've literally, I feel like we've come up together. And so, I mean, like he published one of my early stories. He ended up publishing a novella of mine. Actually, it was after the first MoCon, as a matter of fact, because after the first MoCon, and he wasn't at the first MoCon, but I bumped into him I met him at a convention that later on that year, and he was just like, "Let me get this straight. You have like 3 publishing credits, threw a convention named after yourself, and people showed up. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, we're getting into business with you now. And so that was like what, 2004, something like that, 2004, 2005, something like that. And so we've just been a really big part of each other's lives and careers in a whole lot of ways. So like my first story with them, so this would be like the third iteration of Apex. The first iteration would have been the Digest. It was the Apex Digest magazines, and I had
I remember.
Yeah, and,
I have some copies.
Yeah, oh man, it was such a classic run.
Yeah,
and so much good stuff came out. I mean, I'm looking back and I was like, man, Apex published some amazing stuff, and me.
Yeah.
And so that was the first run, and then he retired Apex, and then I think he was doing a guest edit anthology. He was being an editor for an anthology, and he asked me to send him something. So I was like, hey, look, I just finished a story. You had asked about it, so here I'm gonna send you the story. It's called "Pimp My Airship," and
which I love.
And he goes, yeah, I'm going to reject this. And I'm like, well, I won't say the language I used, because you should never respond back to an editor, much less respond back to an editor with choice words like I was using. But he was like, no, wait, I'm rejecting it for this project. I'm bringing back Apex Magazine. I need to publish this thing there. So I'm like, oh, okay. So that was in issue 2 of the big run of Apex. The what was it, like 120 issues that came out with Apex Magazine?
Yep.
Which ended with me being the guest editor. There was a special Afrofuturism issue, and I was the sole guest editor of that issue. And then I get the email. He's like, yeah, I'm shutting it down for a while, and I'm just like, so let me get this straight. You're about to shut down the magazine with the issue that I edited so that you can run around saying that Maurice killed the magazine, ain't you? And he's like, yeah, that sounds great. And so, lived through that for a bit. And then, but I mean, I knew he would not be able to stay away from the magazine for too long, because it's like a zombie. It just keeps coming back. And so he sent me the email like, look, hey, I'm thinking about bringing the magazine back, but I want you at my side this time fully to do it. And I'm like, sure, it's not like I'm busy or anything, so why not?
One more thing, right?
Right.
One more thing, Maurice.
So I was like, yeah, sure. I do have a soft spot for Apex Magazine. I do love this magazine. I love what it adds to the genre. I love the new voices that it brings and emphasizes. And man, he's going to hear this and hear me say all these nice things about him in the magazine. So I mean, Marshall, edit some of this out.
I'll edit some, or you can just talk a little smack, and then they'll even it out, right?
Exactly. But yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the magazine coming back. So the Kickstarter is going to be next month, and now I'm just full blown editor over there, and so or assistant editor. I can't remember what the official title is, but he's like, nothing really changes because you're basically going to do the job you were doing the whole time anyway. We just didn't give you any credit. Now we're just actually giving you credit. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I believe the first issue, we're looking to do the first issue like in 2021. I believe it's going to be bi-monthly, so 6 issues, and yet with the same amount of original content. So it's basically 6 double-sized issues as opposed to 12 of the monthly issues. So I mean, you're going to get the same amount of content, just 6 times a year instead of 12. So
that's
awesome.
Off. Since you're editing it, like what kind of stories grab you?
Now, so Jason, look here. I'm funding all of that to Jason because I have found that I have no idea what I'm looking at, and every time I answer this question, like weird things happen to the flush pile. So I think the last time I edited, I talked about how because so like for example, I did Dark Faith. I co-edited Dark Faith for Apex, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I made the observation because if in the slush pile, I mean, in the final pool of stories, it became apparent I really love talking animal stories. Like if someone sent in a talking animal story, it seemed to automatically make it to the final pool. And if you read Dark Faith, I think there are at least 2 talking animal stories in Dark Faith itself. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, man, do I have a thing for talking animals? And then I made that comment, and now anytime I edit anywhere, I always get a rash of like talking animal stories, and they still make it to the final pool. So I guess there is something to it, but.
We all wrote that down, Maurice.
Yeah,
we know
like,
now.
Like horrible things about to happen to the slush pile, but
that's hilarious.
But we basically like. I know, like Jason's taste skews dark sci-fi. My tastes tend to skew like really personal. So like the more personal story you tell, the more I'm probably in it. But then but ultimately we're just looking for the best stories that are out there, and I can't speak I can't speak for Jason. We don't want to ever limit that. It's like, I don't want to tell you what we're looking for. I don't want to limit what it is because we might not know what we're looking for until we encounter it. Yeah. And so it's like, send whatever, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's actually really similar to what you had for Fireside when you were the guest editor over there.
Yeah. Now, all right. So now.
I had asked you about that. I was like, what are you looking for? You're like, whatever I like when I read it.
But see, but I also learned something about that too. I learned that editors are, this may shock you, turns out editors are like people also and are very human. And so, and here's what I mean by that, because that was my thing for Fireside. I'm like, send whatever. I'm open to whatever. I mean, yes, I want, I do tend to look for, what's new in society, what's the future, I love that kind of stuff. I love talking animals. I love, I do love these things, but I have no particular theme. Oh yeah, I love Afrofuturism. But I'm not sticking to any particular theme. I wanted to see what bubbles up out of the slush pile, right? And then Fireside, like with Apex, very diverse slush pile. International audience. I'm getting stories in from around the world. I'm loving it. And so here's the thing though, like my father passed away in November, and the slush pile opened up in October, right? So I made my selections of stories. I had my final pool of stories done in December, and like I do with most of my work, I'll set it to the side and like let it sit for a month. That way I can come back to it with fresh eyes, and then see what I have, right? So when I come back to my final pool of stories in January, I'm like going through the final list. I'm like, wow, apparently I was in a mood because the whole theme seems to be revolving around dealing with grief and loss and all these sort of emotional journey type stories. And I'm just like, crap, are you kidding me? It's not something I have to do. But I'm just like, the table of contents now is like this journey of what it looks like to move through grief, to what it means to accept grief. Like there's like literally a story called something like In the Phone Booth Where I Get to Talk to My Dead Dad. Okay, admittedly, that title is a little on the nose. But I mean, you just see this progression of, hey, of grief and loss and what it means to, after you've suffered grief or loss, what it looked like to get your footing back under you in life. And then what does it look like to get to that point where you're able to dream again? I mean, that's literally how the issue now looks like unfolded. And I'm like, I would have never set out to go, hey, everybody send me your grief stories. But on a subconscious level, I didn't realize that was that's what was going on with me, and that got reflected in the table of contents. And yet, you could still see this line of what it means to move through grief to get back to being able to dream again, which was literally the process I was going through. Yeah, so you never know what to send, because you never know what is going on in the editor's life, for example, that's going to shape what you're in the mood for.
Right.
Looking forward, you have you signed, what was it, a 3-book deal? Was it with Tor?
Yeah, I kind of did that.
Mm-hmm. So
tell us the story.
Yeah, will you give us the pitch for it?
Can you brag about yourself for a little bit here?
Yeah. All right, Nick, we just want to hear about you for just a little bit, Maurice, and what you're going to do going forward. Man.
Work. Let me.
You're a busy guy, man. You're a busy guy.
So I was. Actually, the whole actual story was I was in New York working on a project for, and I was actually working on a couple of different projects. I wasn't telling anyone about it. I didn't even tell anyone when I was even going to New York. But I did take a picture of myself in front of the Apollo Theater because, I'm Black and in front of the Apollo Theater. So that picture is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then Diana Foe reached out to me and was like, "Hey, are you in New York right now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Hey, let's get together and talk." So I'm like, "Okay, sure." And so we get together and we're chatting, and she's asking me, what I'm working on and that sort of thing. And I'm at the time I'm wrapping up Pimp My Airship because for reasons, there's a whole story why I was working on Pimp My Airship there, because that wasn't intended to be published. I'll put it to you that way. But suddenly I'm on track to do edits on Pimp My Airship. So I'm working on that, and then I start talking about this. I just written this story about my actual pitch was like hood chicks with guns in space, but which is not actually the pitch, but it was my joke pitch. But I was just like, look, I have these female space Marines. They're Black, and they are just having a series of adventures in space. And Diana's like, that sounds interesting. Get me an outline like that, and maybe we can talk. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so then I'm feeling my Wheaties at this point. I'm just like, look at here. So I call up my agent. I'm just like, look here. Editor at Tor was just like, hey, get me an outline. Maybe we could do something. And she's like, well, what was the idea? So I told her the idea, and she's like, well, of course she said that. That's a great idea. So what I want you to do is I want you to write up 3 chapters of what that's going to look like, and then the outline for what the book would look like, and then give it to me. And I'm like, all right, I'll do that. And so I start doing I start doing my thing. I start doing the world building, because I already have these characters. I'd already written a short story with these characters. I knew them already, but I'm like, oh, what's the kind of world that they would come from? Let me build that world. So I take a while. I take a long while. I take about 6 months or so to build out this world that they come from.
Okay.
And then in my head, I heard the criticism that I got when Pimp My Airship, the short story, came out, which was, hey, we love this story. We love this world, but it seems like there's this fully developed world that we only got to see a glimpse of in the short story.
Mm-hmm.
So having heard that criticism already, I was like, all right, in this novel, let me expand out. So let me come up with a storyline so people will actually get to spend time in this world that I'm launching these ladies out of. And so so I end up with this 3 storyline kind of book where, one's in the Galactic Empire, one's on the starship, and the one is just following these. They aren't even really space Marines, but they are the soldiers of this empire. And so I send that in, and then, like I said, then that word miraculous comes into play at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the only thing that exists of this book are these 3 chapters and the outline. And the next thing I know, it goes to auction, and like people are bidding on it. And I'm losing my mind because I'm just like, what the heck is going on right now? And then Diana does end up with the book over at Tor. And so I'm just like, in fact, it was great because it actually came down to the 2 editors I really wanted to work with most in the industry. So it's like, oh, it's actually not turning out too bad. So
that's awesome.
So if that's the bidding war, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And so so then Diana ends up with it, and it's like yep, 3-book deal. And the official pitch was Black Panther. Black Panther meets Game of Thrones in space. And they've since shortened it to Black Panther meets The Expanse. And so, well,
all right, okay,
I would buy that book too. So I hope they get someone competent to write it, because I look forward to reading it.
And the name, wasn't it the name of the book? Isn't it a Kendrick Lamar? Was it a Kendrick Lamar song?
Yeah. So the whole trilogy is All the Stars, off the Kendrick Lamar song. But each of the individual books are named after. So Langston Hughes wrote a poem called Stars.
Yeah.
And so each of the titles of the individual books is taken from a piece of that poem. So book 1 is Sweep of Stars. And then, and I'm currently outlining book 2, A Little Breath of Oblivion. So
it's awesome.
Love it.
Congrats, man. That's super. That's amazing.
Thanks.
When does it come out?
It comes out, should be by this time next year. We should be looking at it. Hopefully.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
If I nail the
as far as timeline goes on that, Marshall, when we interviewed Maurice the first time, February of last year, someone was celebrating this book deal.
Right. Yeah. Celebrating the book deal, but couldn't tell us anything about it.
We weren't allowed to hear about it for months. And like, we knew you had done something. So that, I mean, kind of perspective though, 2.5 years after your deal kind of came through, you should have a book out. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. A book which I then spent the rest of the, after I don't get me wrong, I celebrated for a while. I mean, I celebrated for a while. And then I was like, oh wait, this was new to me. I'm used to celebrating for a while because the hard work's done. Because normally, if I sign a book deal, that means the book is, done.
The book's done, right?
Right. And then after I was done celebrating, I was like, oh, this book isn't written. Crap, I should have to write this book. So yes, I definitely crawled into a hole and to try and get that book done. And it's just like, whoo, it's not a short book. I think I've turned in I've actually only turned in my second draft of it, to be honest with you. So I'm waiting to get the feedback from it. I didn't want to go too deep. Well, I didn't want to. Well, it was tough getting it there, and so I'm just like, well, let me have you get your input now, editors, before I come back and do my next round of revisions, so I know story wise where to go with things and what to emphasize. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting those rounds of revisions done, and then as I'm plotting out book 2. Which I hope to have book 2. I'm about to tell the big lie and say this book 2 should be done by the end of this year also. But yeah, we'll see.
So it's already done.
Well, so all right.
For those of us not benefiting from the video feed, there's a lot of winking going on.
Right.
Maurice, we're stoked for you, man. We cannot wait for that book, and we love your work.
Thank you.
And you think that's a good place to wrap up, guys?
Well, I also have, so right now I am working on that book, and then I'm also working on my follow-up middle grade book, because that will also come out next year also.
Is it the follow-up to The Usual Suspects or a completely new one?
Completely new one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's called Unfadable. And it was, it's kind of inspired by one of my middle school students. So she's really feeling her Wheaties also, because she's like, Mr. Broaddus, I'm an inspiration. And I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus. All right, fine.
Did you teach her that?
Yeah. You can definitely tell the students who were like, yeah, that's one of his. Yeah. Okay.
That's hilarious.
That's great.
And so, but it follows a young lady from the neighborhood, and so it's set in the neighborhood, and she uncovers different sort of shenanigans, we'll say, perpetrated by adults in the neighborhood when it comes to the business of neighborhood work. And so she literally she's part neighborhood detective, part community organizer as a middle school student. So
that's awesome.
Looking forward to seeing how that book comes out and gets received also. But it's coming along pretty well. I would say everybody seems to be pretty pleased with how it's coming along.
I guess just one more question to keep us on the end.
Mm-hmm.
What keeps you writing?
What keeps me writing?
Yeah.
So what I tend to say is I write for me. I mean, I publish to be read, but I write for me. And so, I'll give you a perfect example of this. Pimp My Airship, the novel, right? So after hearing all that criticism about Pimp My Airship, the short story, I was like, you know what? Maybe I ought to turn this into a novel. Since everybody's talking about how it should have been a novel, blah, 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 blah. I've never done this before, so let me try and turn one of my short stories into a novel. And so I wrote Pimp My Airship, the novel, and then put it in my drawer. Because I wrote it, and I'm like, yeah, I write for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put it away. I was like, okay, mission accomplished, I'm done. So I put the novel away. Now, here's how you guys screwed up my life. And yeah, that's right. I'm blaming y'all.
I'm happy to be blamed for this. I think I don't know.
So I'm now the guest host on writing excuses, right?
Okay.
And so we're having all these conversations about writing and stuff, and someone asked me about the hero's journey, and so I talk about the hero's journey of my character in Pimp My Airship. I'm like, man, he's one of my favorite characters I've ever written. His hero's journey is this brother just wants to get high, and so I have a series of escalating events that keeps him from getting high, and so I'm like talking about this book and everything because this book is done. It's just in my drawer. But to me, it's a completed thing because I did it.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking about it, and I'm like, okay, so, comes and goes. I don't think twice about it. Then those episodes air. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, my inbox is filled with requests of where can we find this book? And I'm like, I can't just say in my drawer.
Right.
I wonder if there's actually a book here worth pursuing. And so like I said, Jason Sizemore is a friend of mine, and he's always a big fan of Pimp My Airship. I'm like, look, Jason, here's my dilemma. I need you as my friend to take a look at a couple chapters of this, see if I have anything worth publishing, and then that way I'll do some revisions and see about trying to get it published. He's like, all right, yeah, I'll take a look at it. So I send it to Jason. He writes back and he's like, yeah, you do have something here. I'll take it. And I'm like, yeah, I wasn't submitting it. I just needed to know if there's something here worth me pursuing. He goes, yes, there is, and I'll take it. And I'm like, you can't just call dibs on a book. And he's like, really? Because
I did.
I just announced it. It's coming out in May. So how you like me now? And I'm just like,
oh, what?
Really? I don't know if we can do this.
That's so funny.
But the fact of the matter is, I did I'm not stupid. So, I mean, I sent it to him for a reason. And,
right.
And the fact of the matter is like, that brings Pimp My Airship full circle. It goes back to where it started. Mm-hmm. But it all comes out of the fact that I write for me. It wasn't something I intended to be published. There are a half dozen novels in my drawer right now, including one of my favorite novels I've ever written in my drawer because I wrote it for me. And that's why I keep writing. I'm still, sometimes I'm angry. I just wrote a short story. That's my first horror short story in probably nearly a decade, to be honest. It was my first horror short story because, hey, the times we live in, and I'm angry. Yeah. And so when I'm angry, I'm back to horror. I don't know where I'll send it. I don't know if I'll send it out. But I had to write it to get stuff. I had to write it to get it out of me. When my father passed, for example, I still had a middle grade novel to write. I still had this that Sweep of Stars was due that December. Oh man! But I'm just like, I can't write the book because I still have all this stuff I got to process from my dad, getting sick and then dying. So I'm just like, so I know it drove everyone in my circle nuts, from my editor to my agent to my wife. But I'm just like, hey, I got to write something to process my grief. And so I said, hey, so I'm gonna take some time out and write this short story. So I wrote a short story. Turns out my 5,000 word short story ended up as a 20,000 word novella. Because apparently I had more to process than I thought. But I had to get that out of me. If I'm going to come back to any of these other projects, I have to deal with my grief, or else I'm not going to be good to anybody. And then that story sold because it sold to a Beneath the Sky. So if you go over to their site, Bound by Sorrow was what came out of that. Wow. And I didn't think he was going to buy the story, to be honest, because I'm like, it's a different sort of story. But he was just like, look, this story felt special, so I want it. So I'm like, all right, great. Even here recently with the uprisings going on, I mean that had locked me up. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't come up with anything because I'm just like, I'm feeling a lot of stuff right now. And so I ended up writing a piece that got published in Indianapolis Monthly that gave me this room and space to process all my anger about, leading up to why the uprisings were necessary. But because I got to process that, I'm like, oh, now I got that out my system, so that now I'm in a healthier mental space. Now I can be back to writing.
And I'll be honest with you, Maurice, after I read that piece in Indianapolis Monthly, I wrote something myself, and it helped a lot. And actually, I got my first published deal on NBC.com just to processing that stuff. Yes. And it's huge, man. So I thank you for that. Cause I when you tweeted that out, I was like, oh, that's how I feel this, you know? Thank you.
I appreciate that. So that's what keeps me writing. I feel, and I have to process my feelings, and I do that all through writing. So
that's awesome.
Well, Maurice, I cannot thank you enough for coming on, man. Spending time with us again. At some point, I'd love to sit on the deck of a boat again and have a cocktail with you. But we'll see what the future holds, right?
We'll see what it holds. I look forward to those days, though. I'll tell you that.
No, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This was great. I could probably have 20 more questions I could ask.
Hey, you know what? I'm not scared. You can bring me back again. Obviously, I
will
mind hanging out with you guys. So.
Oh yeah, for sure you're coming back. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Well,
MoCon next year, we'll do an in-person interview. That's all I'm saying.
From your lips to God's ears, we need it. We need MoCon back. Just saying.
It was gonna be my first year going, and I couldn't go. I was so bummed. We'll get there.
You know what we could do is have a special edition of Maurice's Coffee Shop, and just leave a mic and a recorder out there all day.
Man.
And then Marshall has to edit it.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we're ending that, right? The actual podcast is ending now. If you want to keep chatting, that's great. But someone has to edit this madness at some point, right?
Fine. Be the grown-up, Marshall.
I know. I'm always the bad guy, right?
Pretty much.
This has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing. Check out our website at justkeepwriting.org. You can find links to our social media and Discord channel in the show notes, as well as any other links mentioned during the show. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is patreon.com/justkeepwriting. Thanks for listening.
Now just keep writing.